I never thought my golden years would end like this. At 80, my own son and his wife threw me out of the house I built with my bare hands. But what they didn't know was that I still had one last fight left in me. I still remember the sound of that door slamming behind me. It was louder than thunder, louder than anything I'd ever heard in my life. That was the sound of my son, my only child, shutting me out of the home I'd built, brick by brick, over 50 years ago. My name is Margaret Lewis, and I am 80 years old. I spent most of my life believing that love and sacrifice could never go wrong. I was wrong. When my husband passed away 10 years ago, I thought the pain would end there. But what came next was worse than death. It was betrayal. My son Daniel was my pride. I worked 2 jobs when he was young, one at the diner in the mornings and one as a janitor at night, just to make sure he could go to college. I never complained, never asked for anything in return. I just wanted him to be happy, and for a while he was. He married Lena, a beautiful woman, though I could always sense something cold behind her perfect smile. She was polite at first, respectful even. But the moment my husband's will was read, and the house was officially in Daniel's name, everything changed. It began subtly. She'd move my things out of the kitchen. She'd say things like, "Oh, Margaret, you should rest. You're too old to cook." I thought she was being kind. But then she started locking the fridge at night. She began treating me like a guest in my own home. The laughter that used to fill the rooms was gone. The house felt cold, even with the heater on. One evening, I overheard them talking. Lena's voice was sharp. "Daniel, your mother is becoming a burden. We could use that room for the baby. She's old. She doesn't need much space." Daniel stayed quiet for a moment, then sighed. "You're right. But I just can't throw her out." I froze. My heart sank. I didn't make a sound. I just stood behind the wall, trembling. That night, I couldn't sleep. I prayed to my late husband, asking him to protect me, to give Daniel some sense. The next morning, Lena served breakfast but didn't give me a plate. She said they'd be going out for the day and that I should stay inside and not make a mess. But when they came back, everything was different. Daniel walked into my room holding a small suitcase. My suitcase. His eyes were red, maybe from guilt, or maybe from the fight they'd had before coming upstairs. "Mom," he said, voice trembling, "you should go live with Aunt May for a while. It's better for everyone." I stared at him in disbelief. "Daniel, this is my house." He looked away. "It's mine now, Mom, legally. Please." "Just go." Then Lena stepped in. "He's right, Margaret. You'll be more comfortable somewhere else. We need our privacy." And before I could say another word, they grabbed my arm, dragged me to the door, and pushed me outside. I fell hard onto the cold concrete porch. My knees scraped, but I didn't cry. I just looked up at the house, my house, and saw the curtains close behind them. The lights went out. It was dark, and it started to rain. I sat there for hours, hoping Daniel would open the door again. But he didn't. When the morning came, I was still sitting there. My clothes were soaked, my hands shaking. Neighbors walked past but didn't stop. Nobody wanted to get involved, so I stood up, picked up the small bag I had managed to grab, and walked away, not knowing where to go, not knowing what would happen next. All I knew was that I had lost everything. Or so I thought, but fate, it seems, had other plans for me. The morning after my son threw me out, I found myself sitting on a cracked wooden bench by the roadside. My clothes were still damp from the rain. Cars rushed by, splashing cold water on my feet, but I didn't care. My whole body felt numb. Not from the weather, but from the emptiness inside me. I kept whispering to myself, "This can't be real. Daniel would never do this." But it was real. Every time I blinked, I saw his face, the same boy I once rocked to sleep, now shutting the door in my face. Hours passed, and I must have looked like a lost ghost. Then a woman's voice broke through my thoughts. "Ma'am, are you all right?" I looked up. A young woman in her mid-30s stood there holding an umbrella. She had kind eyes, the kind I hadn't seen in years. I'm fine, I murmured. But my voice cracked halfway through the lie. She sat beside me despite the rain. You don't look fine. Where's your family? That question cut deep. I turned away, staring at the gray puddles on the street. They're gone, I whispered. She studied me for a second, then gently placed her coat around my shoulders. Come with me, she said softly. You shouldn't be out here alone. I hesitated. My entire life had just collapsed. I didn't know if I could trust anyone. But her warmth reminded me of what kindness once felt like. So I nodded. Her name was Clara. She ran a small bakery down the street. When we entered, the sweet smell of cinnamon and sugar filled the air. She made me sit near the counter and brought me a cup of hot tea. For the first time in a long while, I felt human again. Between sips, she asked gently, Do you have anywhere to go? Children? Relatives? I wanted to tell her the truth, but shame held me back. I didn't want anyone to know that my son, the one I'd sacrificed everything for, had thrown me out like garbage. So I said, No, I'll find somewhere to stay. But Clara wasn't fooled. She could see the truth written all over my wrinkled face. She gave me a small smile. You can stay in the storage room for tonight. It's warm and quiet. Tears welled in my eyes. I couldn't remember the last time someone had shown me such kindness. I thanked her again, and she just waved it off. That night, lying on a small cot surrounded by the smell of baked bread, I stared at the ceiling and thought about everything. My husband, my son, the years I spent building that house, painting the walls, planting roses in the garden, fixing leaky pipes myself. That house wasn't just a building. It was my life, and then it hit me like lightning, the property, the name. The documents. My husband and I had bought that land long before Daniel was even born. I remembered clearly, the title deed was in my name first. My husband added Daniel's name years later, but the ownership wasn't as simple as Lena thought. I sat up suddenly, heart pounding. What if that house wasn't legally theirs after all? The next morning, Clara found me pacing in the small room. I told her everything, from my husband's death to the night Daniel pushed me out. She listened quietly, then said the words that changed everything. Margaret, if the house was in your name, even partially, you might still have legal rights. You should speak to a lawyer. I froze. A lawyer? She nodded. Yes, my cousin works at a law firm downtown. He helps seniors with property cases. I can take you there. For the first time in days, I felt a spark of hope. Later that afternoon, Clara drove me to a modest-looking office on Maple Street. The sign read, Howard and Brooks Legal Services. Inside, everything smelled of paper and coffee. We met Mr. Brooks, a gray-haired attorney with kind but sharp eyes. After listening to my story, he leaned back in his chair and asked, Do you have any documents proving ownership? My heart sank. They're in the house. I was thrown out with nothing, he nodded thoughtfully. If we can retrieve even one document with your name on it, a tax receipt, a deed copy, anything, we can open a case. But you'll need proof. I sat there in silence, fear creeping back into my chest. Clara reached over and squeezed my hand. Don't worry, Margaret. We'll find a way. Mr. Brooks scribbled something on a notepad and said, I'll prepare the initial paperwork. But we'll need to act carefully. If your son believes he owns everything, he might try to destroy evidence. Destroy evidence. That sentence echoed in my mind the entire night. I knew my daughter-in-law. Lena would burn every paper if it meant keeping that house. I couldn't let that happen. The next morning, before dawn, I wrapped Clara's old shawl around my shoulders and took the bus toward my old neighborhood. My heart pounded with every turn of the wheels. When I reached the street, I stayed across the road, watching the house from afar. The curtains were closed. Daniel's car was gone, maybe at work. Lena was probably inside. I needed to get in somehow. I waited until I saw her leave, carrying grocery bags toward her car. As soon as she drove away, I rushed across the street and slipped into the backyard. Through the old gate I had painted blue years ago. Everything looked the same, yet felt different. The rose bushes were dying. The wind chimes no longer sang. I found the spare key under the flower pot, exactly where I had left it decades ago. My hands shook as I opened the door. The smell of my home hit me, faint, dusty, and heartbreaking. I rushed to the old cabinet in the study, where I used to keep all our documents. The drawers were locked, but I knew how to open them. I had hidden a small screwdriver under the vase for emergencies. My fingers worked fast, trembling as I opened the drawer. And there it was, the old brown envelope, worn and faded, with my husband's handwriting, property title, Lewis Residence. I held it to my chest and whispered, "You thought you buried me, Daniel. But you forgot who built this house." When I held that old envelope in my hands, my heart pounded like I was 20 again. The faded paper smelled of age, but to me it smelled like victory, a piece of my past that still had power in it. I carefully tucked it inside my coat and slipped out of the house before Lena came back. The whole bus ride back to Clara's bakery, I couldn't stop shaking. What if they noticed something missing? What if Daniel found out I'd been there? But I pushed those thoughts aside. This was my one chance to get justice. Clara was waiting for me anxiously. When I showed her the envelope, her eyes widened. "Margaret, you did it," I smiled weakly. "Let's just hope it's enough." We took the documents straight to Mr. Brooks at the law firm. He opened the envelope gently, adjusting his glasses as he read. His eyebrows rose with every page. After a few moments, he looked up. "Mrs. Lewis, this is extraordinary. The original deed lists you as the primary owner. Your husband added Daniel's name later, but it was never transferred fully to him. Legally, this means your son can't evict you without your consent." I covered my mouth, tears flooding my eyes. "So that means—" He smiled softly. "That means we can file a case, and you can take your house back." For the first time in weeks, I felt alive again. But that small spark of hope didn't last long. Because the moment the case was filed, word reached Daniel and Lena. The next day, while Clara was closing the bakery, a black car stopped across the street. Daniel stepped out. His face looked older, harder. When he saw me through the bakery window, his eyes narrowed. He stormed in before I could even stand up. "Mom, what are you doing?" he snapped, his voice cold. "I heard you went to a lawyer." Clara stepped between us. "Sir, you need to calm down." He glared at her. "Stay out of this." Then he turned back to me. "Why are you doing this? After everything I've done for you?" I stood up slowly, looking him straight in the eye. "Daniel, you threw me out of my own house. You think I'll just disappear?" His jaw tightened. "That house is mine now. You're too old to live alone." "No," I said quietly. "It's my home, and you'll learn that soon enough." He stared at me for a long time before spitting out, "You'll regret this," and walking out. Clara looked shaken. "He's angry." "You should stay here tonight, just in case." And she was right. Because that night I heard something that chilled me to my bones, a noise. Outside the bakery near the window. I peeked through the blinds and saw two figures standing by the trash bins. They were whispering, moving quickly. Then I saw the flash of light, the reflection of my son's car. They were watching me. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. The next morning, Mr. Brooks called with an update. "Margaret, we've submitted your claim. The court will issue a notice soon. But you must be careful. If your son tries to intimidate you, report it immediately." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "I understand." A few days later, Lena showed up at the bakery. She wore her usual designer coat and that same fake smile. "Margaret," she said sweetly, "can we talk?" I folded my arms. "There's nothing to talk about." She leaned closer. "You're making a mistake. You'll embarrass yourself in court. Everyone will know you've gone senile." I stared at her. "Is that what you think? That I've lost my mind?" Her smile dropped. "You're old, Margaret. Nobody's going to believe you." Then she leaned even closer, whispering, "If you know what's good for you, drop the case. Otherwise, you might not live long enough to see the verdict." My blood ran cold. She turned and walked out before I could say anything. When I told Mr. Brooks, he frowned. "That's a threat. We'll add it to the report, but deep down I was scared. Not of the case, but of what my own son might do. The next hearing was set for the following week. I spent every night rehearsing what I would say, going through every memory, every bill, every photograph that proved I had lived there for decades. Clara helped me gather everything. Old utility bills, receipts for repairs, photographs of me planting the garden. Each piece felt like a fragment of my life, proof that I had existed inside those walls. The morning of the hearing, I wore my late husband's brooch, a small silver bird. I told myself it was a symbol of strength. When we entered the courtroom, Daniel and Lena were already there, sitting with their lawyer. Daniel wouldn't even look at me. Mr. Brooks whispered, "Let me do the talking." The judge entered. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room. Case 3271, Lewis versus Lewis. The hearing began. Their lawyer stood first, painting a picture of me as a confused old woman who didn't understand legal transfers. He claimed I had given the property to my son willingly years ago. Then it was Mr. Brooks's turn. Calm and precise, he presented every piece of evidence. The deed with my name, the tax receipts, the photographs, the timeline. Finally, he called me to the stand. I stood slowly, gripping the wooden edge for support. My knees shook, but my voice was clear. "Your Honor," I began, "this house was built by me and my husband. We poured our lives into it. I cleaned every brick, planted every flower. When my son threw me out, he didn't just take a house. He took my memories, my peace, my dignity." I saw Daniel shift uncomfortably, but I didn't stop. "I'm not here for revenge," I said. "I'm here for what's right." The courtroom was silent. Even the judge looked moved. When I stepped down, Mr. Brooks smiled at me. "You did great," but as we left the courtroom, I noticed Lena whispering something into Daniel's ear, her eyes burning with fury. Something told me this wasn't over yet. After the first hearing, I thought the worst was over. I had my lawyer, my evidence, and the truth on my side. But truth alone isn't always enough, not when you're fighting your own blood. A few days after court, Clara insisted I stay with her again. "Just until things settle," she said. I didn't argue. Something about Lena's eyes in that courtroom had unsettled me. There was venom in them, and I knew venom always finds a way to bite. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept pacing the small room above the bakery, glancing through the window every few minutes. The rain had returned, soft at first, then pounding like angry fists on the glass. At around midnight, I finally drifted off, and then I woke to smoke, thick. Black smoke filled the air, stinging my eyes and burning my throat. The smell of fire was everywhere. "Clara!" I screamed. I stumbled toward the stairs, coughing, my hands shaking. The air was so heavy I could barely breathe. Flames licked the walls, swallowing everything. The shelves, the counter, even the sweet smell of bread that once filled the place. Through the haze, I saw Clara trying to douse the fire with a small extinguisher, yelling for me to get out. I grabbed her arm, and we ran out the back door just as the ceiling began to collapse. Outside, the cold air hit my lungs like knives. Sirens wailed in the distance. Firefighters arrived within minutes, but the bakery was gone. Gone. I stood there watching the flames devour everything she'd worked for. My hands trembled. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. Clara just shook her head. "You're alive, Margaret. That's what matters." But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't an accident. The next morning, after the fire trucks left and the smoke cleared, one of the officers approached us. "Ma'am," he said to Clara, "it appears the fire started near the back door. Accelerant was used." This was no accident. My stomach dropped. Clara gasped. "You mean someone—" He nodded grimly. "Arson." I felt my knees weaken. There was only one person cruel enough to do something like this. "Daniel," I whispered. The officer took our statements and promised an investigation. But deep down, I knew my son and his wife had done this to scare me, to make me back down before the next hearing. When Mr. Brooks heard about the fire, his face hardened. "This changes things. If we can connect them to it, we'll file a criminal charge. But right now, focus on staying safe. Clara moved into a friend's apartment temporarily, and she insisted I go with her. I'm not letting them hurt you, Margaret, she said. Those days were long and quiet. I spent hours staring out the window, wondering how my life had come to this. I had once dreamed of growing old surrounded by family, grandchildren, laughter. Instead, I was living in hiding, hunted by my own child. One evening, I received a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. Hello? A familiar voice spoke, soft but sharp. You should have listened, Mother. My breath caught. Daniel? He didn't respond directly. Drop the case. You're destroying this family. Don't make me do something I'll regret. Then the line went dead. My hand shook so badly that I almost dropped the phone. When I told Mr. Brooks, he said, "We'll record any future calls. Don't speak to him alone." But part of me still hoped, foolishly, that maybe he'd change. Maybe he'd remember who I was. The woman who held him when he cried, who sewed his clothes by hand, who worked herself sick just to give him a future. The next court date came a week later. I dressed simply, gray shawl, my husband's brooch, and a heart full of fear. When we arrived, Lena smirked at me from across the room. She looked triumphant, like she already knew something I didn't. Halfway through the session, her lawyer presented new evidence, a document showing that I had signed over my share of the property years ago. My heart stopped. The paper had my name, my signature. It looked real, but I knew I had never signed anything like that. Mr. Brooks examined it, frowning. "This is a forgery," he said under his breath. The judge looked at me. "Mrs. Lewis, is this your signature?" I stood, my legs trembling. "No, Your Honor. I've never seen that paper before in my life." The judge nodded but said nothing more. The case was postponed for verification. When we left the courtroom, I turned to Daniel. "You forged my name?" He looked away. "You forced my hand, Mom." Lena smiled, cold and cruel. "You should have stayed quiet." That was the moment I realized they were beyond saving. Whatever love once lived in my son's heart had been replaced by greed. Outside, rain began to fall again. Clara wrapped her arm around me as we walked to the car. "Margaret," she said softly, "you can't give up now." I shook my head. "I won't. They took everything from me. My home, your bakery, my peace. But they won't take my soul." That night, I sat at Clara's friend's kitchen table, staring at the flickering candlelight. Every flicker reminded me of the fire, the smoke, the fear, the destruction. But instead of breaking me, it hardened me. If they wanted a fight, they were about to get one. I called Mr. Brooks first thing in the morning. "I want every document checked. Every signature, every record. I'll testify again if I have to. I won't let them win," he sounded proud. "That's the spirit, Mrs. Lewis. We'll bring in a handwriting expert and a notary witness. We'll prove the forgery, for the first time in weeks." I felt that old fire inside me again, the fire that used to keep me going through long nights at the diner, the fire that raised my son. They could burn down buildings, but they couldn't burn down my will. The next few days felt endless. Every hour seemed to stretch into a lifetime as we waited for the handwriting analysis results. My heart lived between hope and fear, two enemies locked in a cruel dance. Mr. Brooks called me daily, reassuring me that things were moving forward. "We've sent the documents to an independent forensic lab," he said. "They'll verify everything soon." But soon felt like forever. Meanwhile, Clara tried to keep me busy. We'd sit in the small apartment kitchen, baking bread again, this time in a borrowed oven. "It's not about the bakery," she'd say. "It's about keeping our hands busy so our hearts don't break." I smiled weakly. "You remind me of my younger self, Clara. Kind, but tougher than you look," she laughed softly. "Guess I learned that from watching you." Then one morning, Mr. Brooks called. I could hear the energy in his voice the second I picked up. "Margaret," he said, "we got the report." I held my breath. The signature on that deed. It's fake. The forensics team confirmed it. The ink's newer than the document itself, and the handwriting doesn't match yours. It's a forgery beyond any doubt. I covered my mouth, trembling. Oh my God. We'll present this in court immediately. This changes everything. When I told Clara, she clapped her hands together. You did it, Margaret. They can't get away with this now. But deep down, I wasn't celebrating yet. I knew my son, and Lena. They'd fight back. They always did. The next court hearing arrived 3 days later. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with tension. Daniel and Lena sat on one side, whispering furiously to each other. I sat quietly beside Mr. Brooks, clutching the edge of the table. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My heart pounded in my ears. Mr. Brooks stood first, presenting the forensic report. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady. The defense submitted a falsified property deed. The attached expert report proves the document is forged. He handed the report to the clerk, who passed it to the judge. The courtroom was silent except for the faint shuffle of paper. Finally, the judge looked up. Is this true, Mr. Lewis? Daniel's lawyer stood, trying to sound confident. Your Honor, we believe this is a misunderstanding. My clients, the judge interrupted sharply. A misunderstanding? Forgery is not a misunderstanding. It's a crime. Lena shifted uncomfortably. Daniel's face went pale. The judge continued. Until this matter is fully investigated, Mrs. Lewis will be granted temporary possession of the property. Further, the court will investigate the origin of this falsified document. For a moment, I couldn't move. I just sat there letting the words sink in. Temporary possession. My home. Tears welled in my eyes. I turned to Mr. Brooks, who smiled softly. You've won the first battle, Margaret. But the war wasn't over. Outside the courtroom, Daniel caught up to me. His face was twisted with anger. You're ruining me, Mom, he shouted. I stood tall, my voice trembling but firm. You ruined yourself, Daniel. I gave you everything. All you had to do was love me. Lena tugged his arm. Let's go, she hissed. But he pulled free. You think you've won? He said through clenched teeth. This isn't over. As they stormed off, I whispered to myself, neither is my strength. That night, Clara and I went back to my neighborhood. The police had placed a temporary seal on the house while the paperwork was processed, but the moment I stepped onto the front porch, I felt something deep inside me shift. The smell of the old wood, the cracked steps, the faint creak of the door hinges. It was home, broken, yes, but still mine. The next morning, the locksmith arrived with Mr. Brooks. Together, they replaced every lock in the house. When he handed me the new keys, I held them like a newborn child. Welcome home, Mrs. Lewis, he said kindly. I walked through each room slowly. Dust coated the furniture. The curtains were drawn. The walls that once held laughter now echoed silence. But as I ran my fingers along the old piano, I whispered, We're back. That evening, Clara helped me clean. We opened the windows, aired the rooms, and made tea in the kitchen. The smell of it filled the house again, the same way it had when my husband was alive. For a brief, beautiful moment, I felt at peace. But peace doesn't come easily when you've been wronged. A week later, while unpacking boxes, I found something that stopped me cold. Hidden inside one of the drawers was a stack of letters. My old mail, all unopened. Bills, tax documents, even medical notices, they had kept everything from me. Among them was a letter from the local bank, a foreclosure notice from months ago. My eyes widened. The house had been under a second mortgage. Daniel had taken a loan against it, my house, without my knowledge. I rushed to Mr. Brooks immediately. When he saw the papers, he sighed heavily. They mortgaged your property illegally. This means fraud on multiple counts. We'll add this to the case. Will I lose the house? I asked, panic rising. He shook his head. No, not if we act fast. The loan was unauthorized. The bank will have to void it once ownership is settled. I closed my eyes, trying to steady my breath. It felt like every time I took one step forward, another secret knocked me back. That night, I sat by the fireplace, staring into the quiet flames. Clara poured us tea and said, "You know, Margaret, some people spend their whole lives running from the truth. But not you. You face it," I smiled weakly. "Maybe that's what age gives us, and not weakness, but courage." She nodded. "And wisdom." We sat in silence for a while, listening to the rain tapping on the windows. I realized that despite everything, the betrayal, the fear, the loss, I had gained something precious: my strength. When the final court date came 2 weeks later, I walked into the courtroom not as a victim, but as a woman who had survived. Daniel and Lena looked smaller somehow, defeated. Their lawyer barely spoke. The judge read the decision slowly, clearly. After reviewing all evidence, the court hereby restores full ownership of the Lewis residence to Mrs. Margaret Lewis. The forged documents and illegal mortgage actions are now under criminal investigation. The gavel struck. The sound was final. I closed my eyes. For the first time in months, I could breathe again. The day the court handed me back my home, I didn't feel like celebrating. You'd think I'd dance in the living room or cry tears of joy at the kitchen table, but instead, I just stood in the doorway, holding the new keys, staring into the place where everything had fallen apart, and somehow begun again. It was quiet. The kind of quiet that's not peaceful but heavy. The air smelled of dust and memories. I walked from room to room, touching the walls, the window frames, the photographs that had survived. My husband's chair was still in the corner of the living room, worn, faded, but waiting, like it somehow knew I'd return. "Frank," I whispered, my hand trembling on the backrest. I did it. I came home, and for a moment I swore I could feel him there, warm, proud, and close. But home wasn't the same anymore. The betrayal had left scars no cleaning or painting could fix. Still, I decided this house wouldn't remain a monument to pain. It would become a symbol of strength, not just for me, but for every woman who had ever been cast aside, silenced, or told she was too old to fight. The next morning, I opened every window and let the sunlight flood in. The smell of fresh air, the sound of birds outside. It felt like the house was breathing again. Clara came over with flowers and groceries. "You know," she said, arranging tulips in a vase, "most people would have given up." "You didn't," I smiled faintly. "Maybe it's because I didn't have anything left to lose." She shook her head. "No, Margaret. You had everything worth fighting for. Your dignity, your truth, your home." That night, as we sat by the fire, I looked at her and said, "I think I want to do something with this place." "Like what?" she asked. "I don't know yet," I said softly. "But I don't want to live here alone." "Not anymore," she raised an eyebrow. "You mean, open it up?" I nodded slowly. "Yes, maybe for women like me, widows, the elderly, those who have nowhere to go. A place to rest, to heal," Clara smiled. "A shelter." "More than that," I said. "A home." And that was the beginning. Within a few months, with Mr. Brooks's help, I officially turned my house into the Lewis home, a small refuge for senior women in need. Local volunteers helped repaint the walls, plant flowers, and furnish the spare rooms. The laughter that had once died in these walls began to return, in new voices, softer, older, but stronger. Every evening, we'd gather around the kitchen table, sharing stories over tea. Some stories were sad, some were funny, some were heavy with pain, but every single one was honest, and in that honesty, I found healing. One night, as I sat by the window, watching the lights flicker in the living room where the other women chatted, I felt tears in my eyes, not from sorrow this time, but gratitude. I thought of Daniel. I hadn't heard from him since the trial. The court had ordered him and Lena to repay what they'd stolen, though I doubted they would. But I wasn't angry anymore. He was my son. That would never change. But sometimes love means letting go, even when it breaks you. Maybe one day he'd understand what he lost. Maybe not. Either way, I'd made peace with it. One evening, months later, I received a letter in the mail. No return address. Just my name, written in messy handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it. It was from Daniel. Mom, I don't know how to say this. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm trying to become someone you wouldn't be ashamed of. I lost everything, but maybe that's what I needed to find myself. I hope you're okay. Daniel, I sat in silence for a long time. Then with a trembling smile, I whispered, I am, my son. I finally am. The next morning, I went to the garden, now blooming again with roses and daisies, and buried that letter beneath the roots of the old oak tree. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about release. Standing there, I looked up at the sky, golden with dawn. The same sky that had watched me cry on the street that cold night months ago. Now it watched me stand tall, unbroken. Thank you, I whispered to the wind. For the pain, for the lessons, for the second chance. That night, before bed, I looked around the house one last time. The women were asleep, the halls were quiet, and the stars painted soft patterns through the windows. I turned off the last light and said to myself, this isn't just my house anymore. It's proof that even after betrayal, after loss, after heartbreak, life begins again. I lay down, feeling peace I hadn't known in years. Not the peace of comfort, but of survival. The kind that comes from walking through fire and realizing you're still standing. And as I drifted into sleep, I thought of all the women who would one day knock on my door, afraid and broken, just as I had been, and I smiled, knowing I'd open that door with warmth. Not fear, because I finally understood something. They may take your home, your comfort, even your family. But if they don't take your heart, they've taken nothing at all. This was my story. A story of loss, betrayal, and rebirth. If you've ever felt forgotten, know this. Strength doesn't come from what we have, but from what we survive. And sometimes starting over doesn't mean beginning again. It means finally coming home. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and tell me where you're watching from. Because stories like mine deserve to be heard by every heart that still believes in second chances.